It looks like today we have most of you joining us on your own, but we do have several groups of people. As always, I'll go over the instructions in a little bit for sending us those attendee lists. We also have most of you joining us by computer only. So for those of you who are, I just want to remind you again, if you do have any issues with the sound, the phone number is in the top left-hand corner of your screen. Please call in to that phone number if you do have any issues with the sound today. Sometimes the internet can cause those issues. For those of you listening both on your computer and your phone, I will remind you to please mute your computer speakers so that you can hear better through the phone. It also looks like we have a very good representation across the organizations today. We have about 40% of you from state DOTs, 3% from federal DOT, 11% from local DOT, 11% from other federal, state, and local government agencies, about 13% from educational institutions, and about 20% from private consultants today. And as far as where you're coming from across the country, we have about 30% of you from the Midwest, 40% from the West, 14% from the Southeast, 11% from the Northeast, and we even have 3% of people joining us from other places today. So welcome everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm going to move us over to our presentation right now. So just a few logistics for you. Today's webinar should be about an hour and a half long. It is being recorded, as all of our webinars are, and it will be archived on our website in about a week. We will send you a thank you email with the link for that archive when it is available. For quality of this recording, as I mentioned before, we have muted all phone lines except for the presenters. If you are listening on your phone, please make sure that those computer speakers are muted. To maximize the presentation on your screen, especially for a few of the charts that will be shown and for the video, there are 4 arrows that point outward in the top right-hand corner. That will get rid of all of the extraneous information around the outside of the screen and make the PowerPoint itself as big as it can be. At the end of each section today, there will be time for question and answers. We will use the chat pod to the left-hand side of the screen for our question and answer. You can feel free to put your questions in there at any time, and when we do stop at one of those breaks, I will read your questions out to our speakers. There's also a handout pod at the bottom of the screen in the left-hand corner. There you can find the PDF version of today's slides in case you'd like to download that. There will be a few resource links available in this webinar that you may want accessible later. And there is also a handout for our safety summit that will be happening in December that we'll talk about a little bit later on today. As I mentioned earlier, if you are one of those people visiting us today in a group, in a conference room, if you could send the group list with names and emails to our email at info@ruralsafetycenter.org. This will allow us to send you out the surveys. We will have 2 surveys that will happen. The first one will come out directly following today's webinar, and the next one will come out in 3 months. The difference in those is that first one is going to be how you can select to receive our certificates of completion and CEU credits. The second one that will come out in 3 months will be to find out how you use the information from today's webinar, whether or not you shared this with some of your colleagues, if you've joined the Road to Zero because of this presentation, or any other ways that you may have used this information. So real quick again, as I mentioned, that survey link will be emailed as soon as the webinar is complete today, but in case it does not show up in your inbox, it is available right here on the screen right now, also available in that PDF download. Sometimes that link does end up in people's junk boxes. That survey, again, is the only way to request the continuing education units and the certificates of completion. The survey will close 2 weeks after the webinar, so you can expect to receive your certificates and CEU forms about 3 to 4 weeks after the webinar. You're going to return that CEU form to the continuinged@montana.edu and not to the Safety Center. That is run through our Montana State University program. If you do ever need to find out or be able to show that you do have those CEUs, you'll request a verification of completion form, which is the one that you can see in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen right now, and that will show you which of the Safety Center's webinars you have taken and how many CEUs and hours that you have available to you. So for today's presenters, we're very glad to have Jane Terry and Jeff Lindley both with us today. Jane Terry is the Senior Director in Government Affairs. She is an experienced policy and legislative leader with 20 years of experience working with local, state, and federal government officials on transportation, telecommunications, workplace safety, community development, and healthcare initiatives. Prior to joining the National Safety Council, Jane served as the Director of Government Affairs at the National Transportation Safety Board. In this role, she effectively communicated the work of the NTSB to congressional leaders, resulting in higher level of funding for the agency during a time of budget cuts. Her education and advocacy efforts resulted in many NTSB safety recommendations in the areas of aviation, pipeline, rail, and highway safety becoming law. At NTSB, Jane developed the platform for the on-scene government affairs support for accident investigations. She led the on-the-ground engagement with elected officials and the community during the 2015 Amtrak derailment in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the 2014 Harlem, New York gas pipeline explosion, the 2013 crude oil train derailment and explosion in Castleton, North Dakota, as well as a few other accidents that have occurred. Jane led her own government relations firm in Atlanta, Georgia, handling transportation and local government policy at the state and federal levels. Prior to that, she worked in Washington, D.C. on the staff of Georgia Senator Max Cleveland. We also have Jeff Lindley from the Institute of Transportation Engineers with us today. He currently serves as the Associate Executive Director and Chief Technical Officer, where he leads the development and delivery of technical activities focused on serving the needs of the Institute's over 15,000 members. Prior to joining ITE in October of 2016, he completed a 31-year career with the Federal Highway Administration, serving in a variety of technical and leadership positions, including California Division Administrator, Associate Administrator for Safety, and Associate Administrator for Operations. Jeff holds a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from Virginia Tech and a master's degree in transportation engineering from the University of Maryland. He is a registered engineer in the state of Virginia. So for today's webinar, we hope that once we have completed, you will have an overview of the new Road to Zero Coalition vision document entitled A Road to Zero, a vision for achieving zero roadway deaths by 2050. To do this, we have several learning objectives laid out for you. The first is to understand that zero is an achievable goal for our roadways, and we have reached it in other modes. To appreciate current roadway death and injury data, to learn about the Road to Zero Coalition and realize more partners that are available with a commitment to shared goals, to participate in the Road to Zero Coalition, to take action, energize a large coalition around roadway safety proposals, and to recognize the need to celebrate zeros when and where we can. And so at this point, I am going to take us over to our first poll break. And we'd like to ask the audience a few questions. First, have you ever heard of the Road to Zero Coalition? Yes or no? And do you believe that zero fatalities is achievable? Yes, no, or maybe? And we'll give everyone a few seconds to fill that poll out. Okay, it looks like most people have answered that, so I'm going to go ahead and broadcast those results now so everyone can see those. So it looks like about 62% of you have heard of the Road to Zero Coalition before, and the other 37%, hopefully we'll find out a lot more about it today. And as for believing whether or not zero fatalities is achievable, we have 27% of you who think yes, about 27% who say no, and about 46% who say maybe. And now at this point, right before our speakers start, we do want to start off with showing you a video. So Dana, I'm going to have you go ahead and set that up for us now. And this will just take a minute or two for the video to come up, everyone.
Imagine her world in the year 2050. A colony on Mars. Bloodless surgery. Clean, sustainable energy. The future makes almost anything possible, including zero roadway deaths.
I am confident we can do this together. We must. And the groundwork that this organization, this coalition has built together over the years will be a key part of that.
3 strategies will lead the way. Countermeasures that work have already saved thousands of lives. We will double down on what we know works.
We shouldn't forget about tried and true non-tech interventions that are out there also, ready to be used.
In 30 years, from 1994 to 2014, miles traveled increased 35%, yet traffic fatalities decreased by 5%. Countermeasures work. Safety belts and airbags, DUI checkpoints and laws, red light cameras, traffic roundabouts, and child restraint systems. The road to zero will accelerate the development of advanced driver assistance systems, or ADAS. Human drivers are fallible. Drivers are tired. Drivers are impaired. Drivers are distracted. Smart machines are not. New ADAS technology is being added to new cars every day at all price levels. Car makers have voluntarily agreed to add AEB, automatic emergency braking, to all new cars by 2022.
There's really a remarkable number of technologies that are really coming way down in price. So camera technologies that can have special, essentially computer vision that look out ahead of you and can detect stopped cars and threats, pedestrians that are about to cross in front of you.
Human behavior is such that only technology can override the poor choices that people make when they're operating a vehicle.
Culture and behaviors can change.
We can seek to make safety a priority within our personal lives, within our businesses, corporations, associations, our neighborhoods, schools.
50 years ago, people freely littered. Millions smoked in public. The use of safety belts was not the norm. People can change. The road to zero requires a rigorous adoption of safety culture.
Safety needs to be a priority. It needs to be part of our culture.
Today, her future is already on the road to zero. The map is clear. Evidence-based solutions are being funded. The journey has begun.
Achieving zero roadway fatalities is not impossible. It just hasn't been done yet. This is our generation's moonshot.
Okay, and following that very insightful video, I am very honored to present Jane Terry now from the National Safety Council to start our webinar. Jane?
Great, thanks everybody. And if that wasn't inspirational enough to sway those about 30% of people who don't think we can reach zero, hopefully at the end of this presentation you will be swayed a little bit more. But just taking from what Debbie Hersman wrapped up with about this being our moonshot, I have to imagine when President Kennedy said we're going to the moon by the end of the decade, the vast majority of the people, more than even the 30%, probably just laughed about that and thought that it would be impossible to accomplish that in the time frame that he had laid out. but we did it. And I think that it's perfectly reasonable to think that we can actually make some changes on the roadways as well to get to zero fatalities there as well. And it's about how do we change the culture that we're living with today, because there does need to be a change in how we think about traveling on the roadways. Losing 100 people a day is no longer acceptable. I thought it would be helpful to take a look at what has been done in some of the other industries out there, because we have seen huge safety gains in some of the other transportation modes. Here we have, of course, aviation. The CAST plan was adopted in the aviation industry, and it was a collective group of operators, of manufacturers, of the pilots, of mechanics, everybody who was involved in the aviation industry. They came together with the goal of reducing fatalities by 80% in 10 years. And I think we all know what has happened in aviation. We have one of the safest aviation systems in the world now. Of course, we had the incident on Southwest Airlines a few weeks ago, but that's the first time that we've had a fatal event on a domestic carrier since 2009. And for those of you who lived in the U.S. in the 90s, you may remember just the back-to-back events that occurred in aviation during that time, like ValueJet, like TWA 800, and so many others that people really were scared of flying. But today, we have gone for years without fatalities on domestic carriers in the aviation industry. And if I could poll all of you right now, I just mentioned this event, but I'm sure all of you would raise your hand or indicate yes, that you are aware of what this picture is from. As I mentioned, Southwest Airlines, there was a fatal event that occurred just a few weeks ago, and one fatality as a result of a window being broken off from a flying debris from the engine. This was a very tragic event. A mother, a wife, a daughter was lost as a result of what happened here. It received national attention. There was a federal agency that began an investigation. Checks were made of all the engines that have this type of engine on aircraft. Congressional hearings were held, and many other things happened as a result of this. Yet that same day, we lost 100 other people on the roadways, and all of those are just as tragic, but yet there's not all the attention from the media, from others. There's not the outcry from our elected officials about all of those people who lost their lives as a result of traveling on our roadways. So just to take a look at another mode of transportation, this is actually a historical poster from the railroad, for the railroad industry. It's a National Safety Council poster encouraging people to do decoupling of trains in a safer way, because people were actually losing their feet by trying to decouple trains, as you can see in this picture, by using their feet to do so. It used to be at the turn of the last century that being in the railroad industry was the most fatal industry to be in. But as a result of a few different things coming together, it was advances in technology, improvements in safety education, and other items. Those fatality rates have come down dramatically, as you can see by this chart. Today, We lose less than 20 people a year on the railroad as employees, and it's been that way for several years, as you can see. So we go from one of the most fatal things you can do on the roadway, or excuse me, in your occupation to one of the safest. And actually, ironically, today the leading cause of death in the workplace are car crashes. We lose 40% of people on the job because of a car crash. As you can see here, that there's more that we can do, especially from the employer angle, to try to improve safety of our employees when they're out on the roadways. And so getting them involved, because this is also an employer issue as well. So for those of you who indicated that maybe zero is something you think is achievable or no, it's not, I think one of the things that we have to ask ourselves is then what is the right number that we should be looking for? The National Safety Council estimates that 40,000 people lost their lives in 2017 to vehicle crashes, and that is the same for 2016. And just to elaborate on that, because our 2016 number, as you know, is higher than the NHTSA number, the National Safety Council also looks at fatalities that may occur on driveways, on private roadways as well, parking lots. So these still involve vehicles, but it will be a higher number than what NHTSA reports because we do this wider look at where the fatalities take place. But our number that we put out at the National Safety Council tracks precisely with NHTSA's number as well.
Thank you, Jane. And now we are on to our second poll break, and we are at a question and answer section. You can go ahead and put those questions, as I mentioned before, into the chat pod on the left-hand side, and we'll ask those to Jane for you. Our first poll question for you is, which other modes of transportation have focused on reaching zero? Aviation, railroad, all of the above, none of the above, or I don't know and I don't remember. I'll give you just a few seconds to go ahead and fill that out. And it does look like everyone has gone ahead and answered that, so I'm going to broadcast the results so you can see those now. If you'd like to go ahead and respond to the survey, Jane, it does look like there is someone typing in a question for you. Okay, it looks like about 84% of you said all of the above for which other modes of transportation have focused on reaching zero, and that is true. It was all of the above, both aviation and railroad. Looks like our question may still be getting typed in, so I am going to bring us back to the presentation, and we'll carry on to the next section, and we'll address that question when it does get typed in all the way. So Jane?
Great, thanks, Jamie. And wanted to just do some level setting here of the current roadway statistics. I think a lot of you will be familiar with this, but no harm in repeating some of these statistics just to drive home the point and help people understand what are the issues that are really at play here. You can see here the motor vehicle deaths and the rate. We had a decline that started around 2008. It also coincided with the last economic downturn. And since that time, as we've been coming out of that economic downturn, starting in 2014, the numbers of deaths on the roadways and the rate have both started to increase, as you see here. and it's increasing at faster than the rate of vehicle miles traveled. So we have a few different factors at play here with what's happening on our roadways and causing these fatalities. I thought it would be helpful to show the map of the U.S. and where some of these hotspots are for the largest increases in the fatalities. So the 2016% change, you can see in red, there's a greater than 12% increase in those states, all the way down to the green ones where there is no change or an actual decrease. So some things that are actually going right in some of the states out there. And then our next slide shows from 2014, which was that low point, you recall from the earlier chart, all the way to 2016. In the United States overall, we experienced a 14% increase in roadway fatalities. And you can see where a lot of that was happening in the United States. And the red states here had an increase of over 25% between those 2 years. So a lot happening in those 2 years on our roadways. And to just dive a little deeper into that data, we'll continue on. I think all of you know, too, that motor vehicle crashes are the leading cause of death for people ages 5 to 24 years old. And for teenagers, it's the leading cause of death overall, as opposed to disease or other causes of death out there. Motor vehicle crashes as a whole are part of what we at the National Safety call preventable deaths, and this category is actually the third leading cause of death in the United States overall. Other things that get included in here are opioid overdoses that is really driving the increase in this category of preventable death, falls by older adults, and some other things that we often refer to as accidents. But we at the National Safety Council actually believe they're 100% preventable. And that's a large part of why we started the Road to Zero Coalition with USDOT to help drive that point home to so many more other people who may just see losing 100 people a day of the cost of being mobile in the country. So I think for young drivers, this is a really interesting look at where those fatalities are actually occurring. And you can see that the drivers being killed are represented by the blue, passengers in red, occupants of the other vehicles in green, and then the non-occupant fatalities, so like pedestrians and cyclists and others like that. But I think this is really interesting to see where some of this is happening. And we know from the research and the data that if you are a teenage driver, a novice driver, and you have other teens in the car with you, you're much more likely to crash than you are if you're driving by yourself. So one of those provisions that are often included in GDL or graduated driver's licensing laws is to limit the number of passengers that teenagers can have, for example. And that's one of the easy things that we can do from a public policy standpoint to try to work in safety into what folks are doing. And also, of course, as parents, we can impose some of these restrictions on our own for our teen drivers as well. Again, here you can see some data on fatal crashes by ages, and of course you see the huge number there of the 19 and under and the 20 to 24, and then it starts to decline, and don't really see an increase until you get to 75 or older. But still, the rate is much less even than the 25 to 34-year-olds, and all the way up to 44 years of age. So how much more can we do, and what are those solutions for our teen drivers? Alcohol. We still have a huge problem of alcohol-impaired driving in this country. About 30% of the deaths on the roads involve alcohol impairment. And what more can we do here? We've seen in this last legislative session that Utah lowered their BAC to 0.05. This was a recommendation that the National Transportation Safety Board issued back in 2013. All other industrialized nations in the world, except for the United States, and I believe Canada, have a lower BAC than what we have here. And impairment really begins earlier, much earlier than 0.08. But because we have this number established by law, there's not a good understanding across the board of the fact that impairment can begin earlier. And also, I think it's difficult for people to understand, when do they reach 0.08? And we're not very good at adjusting our behavior ourselves when we are impaired as well. We also still have a seatbelt problem in this country. 50% of fatal crashes, or those involved in fatal crashes, are unbelted. I just would like to ask everybody on the phone, obviously a rhetorical question at this point, but when you get in a cab or a ride share, do you buckle up in the back seat? You're jumping in a car with somebody who you have no idea how they drive. And there are jokes about how these people drive, and yet every time we get in the back seat, we may not be reaching for that seatbelt as the first thing to do to make sure that we're safe. Having primary enforcement laws in all 50 states can help with this. And of course, we have one state that doesn't have a seatbelt law at all in New Hampshire. So how do we make some changes around this, making sure people buckle up? Speeding. About 30% of fatalities on the roadways are due to speeding. And once the 55 mile per hour national speed limit was abolished, as you know, states have started increasing the speeds on the highways. Fatalities since that speed limit was abolished have actually erased all the gains we've made from safety technology of airbags being included on all vehicles today. So speeding definitely has a role to play, and it's not that we should keep raising the speed to meet the limit of what's going on the roadways. We have to set some limits somewhere to be able to keep folks safe. One of the areas that I think it bears paying attention to as of late is the fatalities that have occurred with our vulnerable road users. And here you can see the pedestrian fatalities and how much those have increased as a percentage of all roadway fatalities, and then the number here. And what are we doing to try to make the roadway environment much friendlier to those who want to walk and or cycle to where they're trying to go? So in just one, before we go to the poll question, there is a comment here about the Utah law and the lowering of the BAC. Yes, the tourism industry and the beverage industry was very much against lowering the BAC, but the legislators and the governor held strong against this. It was a lot of the same arguments from those industries that you heard when the BAC was lowered from 0.1 to 0.08. We know that lowering the BAC saves lives. We've seen it happen in other countries. And if we want to get serious about ending alcohol-impaired driving here in the U.S., lowering the BAC is a step to take. But it is not without its detractors. The more states that start joining on and passing 0.05 laws, the less Utah will be seen as an outlier. But certainly, tourism is going to say people won't come to Utah to take their vacation because they're going to get arrested for a DUI. That has not proven to be the case. And I just look forward to seeing some of the numbers of their fatality reports and seeing how this has actually borne itself out here. It doesn't actually go into effect until the end of this calendar year, but I think given the attention that the BAC lowering has received, you already may have some effects of that law being passed even before it's put into place. Jamie?
Thank you. And it does look like there is, again, another question coming in, so we would encourage everyone to go ahead and type those questions in to the chat pod on the left-hand side. While we are waiting for those to come in, I will move us to the next poll break and ask everyone else a question. So the first one is, were you surprised by any of the data presented? Yes, no, I don't know, or I don't remember. And if yes, which data was the one that surprised you? The speeding, alcohol, pedestrians, occupant restraint, or young drivers? And you can select all that may apply in that list. Jane, we do have a question that came in for you that I'll ask you now while we're waiting for the results of the poll. It is, we continue to see legislative interest in raising speed limits, even situations where the limits exceed the design speed for the roadway. Does the National Safety Council have resources to address this?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And National Safety Council does get involved in state legislative policy and laws that are being proposed at the state level. If there is something in particular that is happening in your state with regards to increasing the speed limit, we are more than happy to get involved there. Also, the Road to Zero Coalition is actually working on a statement about speed and about things like that the 85th percentile, that those rules don't really need to be applied any longer to adjust speed limit increases. We have seen a lot of fatalities, as you saw from just the data, from speed increases, and there's so much more that we can do. And it's really more about calming the traffic down, lowering the speed limits, and I'll get to that more in my presentation. But I think if you're looking for some specific help from NFC, please reach out to me. And then also, I think just use the information from the Road to Zero Coalition to show the support of the coalition to ensuring that people are traveling at safe speeds on the roadways.
It does look like everyone has gone ahead and filled out the poll question, so I'm going to go ahead and close those and show everyone the results. It looks like about 64% of you were not surprised by the data, but 35% were. And for those of you who were surprised, it looks like occupant restraint was the largest surprise for everyone, about 48%, about 43% for pedestrians, and 38% for younger drivers. And then a little less surprising on the alcohol and the speeding side. Jane, do you have any thoughts on those poll questions?
I think the pedestrian one I'm not terribly surprised about. Myself, that would be the one that surprised me the most. I didn't realize that the rate of increase in pedestrian fatalities was as great as it is, and it certainly, for me, gives even more support to movements like the Road to Zero Coalition and some of the groups that we also claim as part of it, like the Vision Zero Network. And we're going to talk more about that, and I know Jeff Lindley is going to talk about that as well in his part of the presentation too. And the occupant restraint one, I mean, just please remember, buckle up every time you get in a vehicle, even if it's just running out to run to the store quickly, because that's going to be your best protection, is to keep yourself inside the vehicle in case of a crash.
We did have a few other questions that came in for you as well, Jane. The next one is, what's your opinion on the Share the Road movement?
I think that anytime you've got a group that's coming together to educate about some of the safety issues, it's a good thing. And you'll see in my presentation coming up some of the ways that in Asheville, North Carolina, that they addressed an intersection change to accommodate mixed use and be more welcoming to pedestrians and cyclists on the roadways. There are really some innovative changes that some cities are doing to make sure that everybody who wants to use the roadway is doing so in a safe manner. I remember back in high school, I wanted to try to get more exercise, so I was going to bicycle on the roadway. And when I told my parents that I was going to do this, they just looked at me like, "You are crazy. We are not going to allow you to do this," because there weren't any sidewalks where we lived. And thank goodness, I think about that now and just trying to cycle on the roadways. And now that you have phones in the cars and touch screens in the vehicles, and how often people are looking down as opposed to looking up when they're driving a vehicle. And it's hard when it's vehicle versus cyclist or versus pedestrian for the pedestrian to survive those types of crashes. And there'll be a little bit more on that too coming up.
Okay, well, we'll ask one more question now, and then we'll save the other one for the next break. The next one is, how does enforcement or lack thereof play into these statistics, specifically when it comes to the fatalities related to alcohol and occupant restraint? Feel that casual enforcement or none promotes the problem a bit for second offenses.
So I think enforcement is definitely one of the tools that we can use to bring down roadway fatalities. As you know, there are a lot of different priorities for local law enforcement to be handling on a regular basis. And I think a lot of you know some of the problems that local, state, and federal governments have had recently with revenue coming out of the economic downturn as well. So it's just a multi-pronged issue when you're talking about enforcement, but certainly we know from data that efforts like sobriety checkpoints, when those happen and when they're advertised, there is less alcohol impaired driving on the roadways. So it's an important part of bringing down the fatalities.
Perfect, thank you. I have moved us back to the presentation, Jane, so if you'd like to start the next section, you're all set.
Great. So the Road to Zero Coalition, we started it in October of 2016, the National Safety Council and US DOT, and it really has three main components that you can see here, and I'll take a little bit of time here to go through those three components. One is the coalition membership itself, and this is the coalition of the willing. We have, this slide is actually a little bit outdated. We're actually over 700 members now. And when we started this back in 2016, we were wondering if we could even get 100 people to join us on this idea of getting to zero fatalities. But here we are with over 700 members now. They're from all different types of walks of life here. You can see advocacy, businesses, government, and others. And I encourage each of you on this webinar today, if you haven't joined, please do. It's completely free to join, and it just requires that you're committed to reaching zero roadway fatalities too, and let other folks know about it as well. It's important to have that community where you feel like you've got some support in order to reach a goal. So the coalition is a huge part of it. Our grants, we awarded $1 million last year, money that was provided by NHTSA to National Safety Council. We pushed out $1 million and we were able to fund projects last year. Those are coming to a close here in the next few weeks, and we will try to push out the findings from that first year of grants. And then this year, we actually got $1.5 million, $1 million from NHTSA and $500 from Federal Highway to push out an award to grantees for this year. And one of our grantees, Jeff Lindley with ITE, is on the phone, and he's going to talk about, I know, the work that he is doing on their grant. I lost my connection here, but I can keep going. And just, Jamie, can you still hear me?
Yes, we can still hear you.
Great. Can somebody advance the slide for me too?
Yep.
Okay. So the picture you see there is just a small segment of that coalition of the willing, and this was one of our first meetings where we came together to start working on the coalition report. And if you can go to the next slide, we just released this report, this Road to Zero Coalition vision document last month. And the groups, we had about 60 different people from all different types of transportation modes who participated in developing this report. There are three main tenets of the report: double down on what works, accelerate technology, and prioritize safety. And just to go into each of those a little bit further, if you can go to the next slide, please. So double down on what works. These are those proven safety countermeasures that we know will reduce fatalities on our roadways. Things like I already mentioned, like sobriety checkpoints, like click it or ticket. These are programs that are out there. A lot of them are behavioral-based programs operated by state and local governments that make a difference in our fatality numbers. You can go to the next slide, please. So I mentioned earlier that Road to Zero has different priority statements, and one of them is about occupant restraint here. Here's some information to just put out in your communities and other groups about the difference that buckling up each ride every time makes if you are to have a crash. And the next slide, please. I mentioned also about the speed and how speed makes a difference when you're talking about interacting with roadway users who are not inside a vehicle. And here you can see a car traveling at 20 miles per hour. If they strike a pedestrian, you're likely to have 9 out of 10 pedestrians that will survive that impact. But if you double the speed of that vehicle, it's exactly the opposite. And you'll have only one person who's likely to survive a vehicle impact at 40 miles per hour. And this is for that average pedestrian. Obviously, some of our older adults and also children would be different results here. But speed makes a huge difference when you get above 25 miles an hour. Next slide, please. Accelerate technology. A lot of this is around vehicle technology that we know is coming online today. Here, we've got 3 different technologies that, according to Carnegie Mellon, we know that if these are implemented across the fleet, it could save up to 10,000 lives. Forward collision warning, lane departure warning, and blind spot monitoring. Next slide, please. Some of you may have seen last year that the automakers agreed to, in 2016, agreed to install automatic emergency braking in all of their vehicles by 2022. Safety technology should not be just for those who can afford it, buying those higher end packages, but it should be available on all makes and models of cars. Toyota came out shortly after this agreement was signed and actually said they're installing it on all their vehicle makes and models by 2018. So this year it should be in all Toyota cars. But glad that it's going to be on all vehicles by 2022 without a federal regulatory mandate for that to happen. Next slide, please. And the third point in the report is all about prioritizing safety. And this is about how we think about what happens on our roadways. The fact that we're not outraged by losing 100 people a day is a huge problem, that we look at this as just the cost of being mobile. On the next slide, please. Here's what I think any of us would think about traveling as a pedestrian along the roadway. We're just going out, walking as we normally would, walking along the crosswalks here. This is how we think about it when we're not necessarily really thinking about everything. But if you go to the next slide, you can see maybe what we should be thinking about if we're really prioritizing safety is looking for where all those pitfalls could be. And would you operate the same way on the roadways as a pedestrian if it looked more like this? And I think that's just something to think about when you're out operating on the roadway as a pedestrian, a cyclist, or in a vehicle. Is how can you be the safest possible, even when you're going on a route that you may have traveled thousands of times before. The next slide, please. So I mentioned earlier about this project in Asheville, North Carolina, to illustrate changes that were made at an intersection. So on the left-hand side, you see an intersection that is pretty normal to what you would see in any town in America. And on the right-hand side, you see what happened after they put in some traffic calming measures like the roundabout. We may not be as comfortable with navigating a roundabout, but it made some strategic changes in this intersection that will improve safety. One of those things is, again, this traffic calming of bringing the speed down when you approach a roundabout that wouldn't necessarily happen as you approach an intersection. In workplace safety, there's an idea called the hierarchy of control. And at the top of that, it's a pyramid of steps to take to make things safer. At the top of that is to remove the safety problem completely from the equation. And that's really what we're talking about here when you institute some of these engineering changes in intersections, is that you're removing the safety problem. At T-bone or T intersections, you're more likely to have those T-bone crashes that occur at high speeds and are very often fatal. With a roundabout, you may have more fender benders, but they're not going to be fatal crashes. You can also see it's a more welcoming environment for pedestrians and cyclists as well. For the next slide, just want to spend a little time talking too about EMS and the response to fatal crashes and how that can impact the number of fatalities that we have in this nation. This is one of the items that was news to me when I started working on the Road to Zero Coalition. The fact that over 40% of people who are later declared fatal in crashes actually reach the hospital alive. And part of this is due to, in the next slide, you can see this is where we have our level 1 trauma centers across the nation. And the green color shows about an hour drive from that level 1 trauma center. There's still a lot of white space out there in the U.S., and I know especially since this is aimed at rural America, I mean, that really impacts you. And if you go to the next slide, because not all of these responses to crashes are done in an ambulance or other vehicle, you can see if you switch it to air, so if you're using a helicopter, here's your reach that you have within an hour after a crash occurs. So looking at some of these other factors really can make a difference when you're thinking about how do we reach zero fatalities. And so thinking innovatively about what does emergency response look like for each and every one of us. You know, and I think things like, what if we come upon a crash before an emergency responder does? Are we prepared to give some type of aid in those situations and really serve as a first responder, for example? One of the things that the Road to Zero Coalition did on our first anniversary is we gave tourniquet kits to everybody. because we know from data that after a car crash, you're much more likely to need to know how to do a tourniquet. If you're the first responder as a citizen responder, you're much more likely to need to know how to give a tourniquet as opposed to first aid or CPR to stop that bleeding event. So, Jamie? And I'll try to get back online here while you're going through this next break.
Perfect. Thank you. And I'm sorry that you did lose connection. So we are going to move along to the next poll break, and we are at another question and answer section. We do have a few questions in the chat pod already, but please feel free to add some more. We'd love to ask Jane as many questions as possible while we do have her available. So our next poll question for you is, which is not one of the three main actions of the Road to Zero? Double down on what works, accelerate technology, conduct research, prioritize safety, or I don't know, don't remember. And we'll give you a few seconds to go ahead and fill out that poll question. And it does look like just about everyone's filled out the poll question at this point, so I am going to end it and broadcast those results for you. And about 65% of you chose the correct answer, which was conducting research. So the Road to Zero does not do that. While they do offer grants for other people to promote Road to Zero projects and conduct research, they themselves do not. Their three main actions are the double down on what works, accelerate technology, and prioritize safety. And at the end of the presentation, we will provide you with the web address for the Road to Zero Coalition, so you can go ahead and look at the rest of the resources that they do have available there, as well as the list that Jane presented earlier on the grants that they have given out and some more information on that. I do also want to point out in the chat pod that Hillary Eisbrands from FHWA did also put in the link to FHWA's proven safety countermeasures. Jane did talk about to make sure you're using what does work, and FHWA does have those proven safety countermeasures available. And if you do go to that website, which is safety.fhwa.dot.gov/proven countermeasures, there will be a separate page for each of those proven safety countermeasures with more details. And if you do have any additional questions on those, you can also reach out to the Safety Center and we can put you in contact with the correct contact for those as well. Jane, have you had any luck getting back on the presentation?
I am back on, thank you.
Okay, perfect. We do have a few questions that came in for you as well. So the next one we have for you is, do we have good data to determine if those involved in fatal crashes were actually obeying the speed limit?
Great question. I think I don't know the exact answer to that, but I know, I don't know what the breakdown is, I should say, but I know in a lot of the cases it is driving faster than the speed limit, but in some of those cases it would be potentially driving the speed limit, but excessive speed for the conditions. I think this is one of those things, again, we learn as drivers, is that when it's snowing, when it's raining, you're not going to drive, even if the speed limit's 65 miles per hour, you maybe shouldn't be driving that fast in those types of conditions. So being able to self-regulate is an important part of remaining safe on our roadways and around other roadway users.
Okay, and it does look like that may have been the only additional question that we had for you. Oh, nope, there is one more, sorry. What is the process for joining the coalition?
Great question, and I'm about to talk about that right now.
Perfect, and the slides are all set for you to continue on to that section.
Thanks. Well, hopefully you're all super excited about joining the coalition now and joining this like I said, the Coalition of the Willing to Reach Zero Fatalities. Here we've got a picture from one of our last coalition meetings of everybody holding our Destination Zero signs. It's easy, very easy to join. You just go to nsc.org/road20 to actually join the coalition. There's a quick join button over on the right-hand side of the web page. Again, it's free to join. You just have to provide your contact information, and we'll add you to our list to make sure you're aware when upcoming coalition meetings are. And then we also send out a monthly newsletter. This is definitely our generation's moonshot goal, and every step that we take closer to reaching zero is hundreds, if not thousands, of lives saved. And it can make a huge difference in the lives of those families who would have potentially lost loved ones. Because I think for many of us, being involved in road safety, there's a story there. It's a family member, another loved one who we may have lost that made an impact on us, and we want to know how to change things for that next family so that they don't face that same heartbreak. We want you to join us on the road to zero to help you amplify the work that you're doing to reach zero and prevent those fatalities, and to find others who you can work with to accomplish these shared goals too. Because it's much easier to accomplish all of this when we're working together as opposed to when we're not. And I hope that that chart, whoever may do this presentation in 2050, that they will be able to show you a fatality chart that looks a little bit more like this at that time. But I definitely appreciate y'all joining us here today to talk about this. I know we've got a little bit more, but did want to just make sure that you all know how to get to the road to zero to join the coalition.
And at this point, we will take a few more questions if you'd like to type any into the chat pod. We are going to move over to another poll break as well. And which of the following of these statements is false? I can join the road to zero by filling out a form online. I have to work for a government agency to join the road to zero. If I cannot attend the road to zero meetings in person, I can stream them online. The road to zero has a communication toolkit for me to use. I don't know, or I don't remember. Okay, and it does look like everyone's had the chance to go ahead and fill this out. So 93% of you are correct. You do not have to work for a government agency to join the Road to Zero. Anyone can go ahead and join that. And these links are also provided in the handout that's in the bottom left-hand corner from these PowerPoint presentations. So that link for where you can fill out the form online to join the Road to Zero Coalition. The communications toolkit for you to use, that link is also provided for you that you're seeing right now in the poll question. And if you do go to that nsc.org Road to Safety, Road to Zero, you can also access all of their meetings online. They do provide them as a webcast right on their website as they are going.
Yes, and so just to add on to it, Jamie had said, we meet quarterly as a coalition in Washington, D.C., but if you can't join us there, we do webcast all of our meetings, and we also post them online, as she said. So even if you're not in the Washington, D.C. area, please join. It's really about a commitment to zero, and join us online for our coalition meetings.
Thank you. And at this point, we are going to ask Jeff Lindley to speak to us a little bit about what ITE is doing as well for the Road to Zero. So Jeff?
Thanks, Jamie. And thank you as well to Jane for all the great information that she's provided so far as part of the webinar as well. I've got an opportunity to talk to you a little bit about what ITE is doing to help to get to the vision of zero fatalities and serious injuries. And I'm going to focus on what individual organizations can do to support the path that has been outlined by the coalition. See if I can get the slides to advance. You just want to go to the next one. I only have two. So ITE and has been focused on Vision Zero activities about the same time as the Road to Zero Coalition got underway as well. We launched a technical initiative in this area in the summer of 2016. It was an area that our membership and our leadership felt was important to get involved in. We established three goals for that initiative when we started it. We wanted to identify and pursue opportunities for ITE to coordinate with other partners on Vision Zero, and certainly the Road to Zero Coalition has helped us do that. We wanted to provide a central location for all transportation professionals, especially ITE members, to access practice-ready resources on Vision Zero and related material, and I'll talk a little bit about how we've done that. And we wanted to promote a Vision Zero and safe systems culture mentality across all areas of professional transportation practice. So the first thing we did was we organized ourselves a little bit. We formed a steering committee and a technical working group. The steering committee includes both members and leaders from ITE as well as other organizations. Some of the other organizations that we have represented on our steering committee include the Society of Automotive Engineers, Vision Zero Network, a few individual Vision Zero cities, the AAA Foundation for Highway Safety, the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, as well as others. And we have, the steering committee meets every other month, the technical working group meets as needed, and we have spent the last, coming up on 2 years, working on trying to develop more information, more products, and more progress on Vision Zero. One of the first things we did was we developed a safety resources toolbox. We wanted to pull together all of the key resources for folks that were interested in pursuing Vision Zero. It was launched in April of last year. It currently contains over 700 resources that are all web-based and in a database that is searchable, so that you can go onto that toolbox and find the safety resources that you need. We enhanced the search capabilities for that toolbox a little bit several months ago, so there are a number of different ways to search through the information that's in the toolbox and find what you need. I've included the website address there, www.ite.org/Vision0, which is actually the web address for all of our Vision Zero content, but the toolbox you'll find highly visible on that site. When the Road to Zero Coalition was formed, we were one of the first organizations that joined. And I will say, if you're thinking about joining, I think the real value of being part of Road to Zero is, as Jane said, the power of many organizations and many individuals that are passionate about the same subject, all working together. There is a saying that some of us are smarter than one of us, and all of us are smarter than some of us. And I think that has been the case through the work that we've done on Road to Zero. Just having folks that are like-minded and passionate about getting to zero working together, I think provides a lot of benefits. I've listed a couple of other things on this slide that you can find on our website. Our upcoming 2018 annual meeting in Minneapolis in August, we have quite a bit of content on Vision Zero. We have 4 podium sessions, a poster session, a couple of workshops, one on speed management, and lots of of discussion about Vision Zero topics that I think you'll find as part of that agenda. The agenda, again, is on the website. We've done a number of webinars in the Vision Zero area. Probably the most popular one that you can find on our website was one that was done last November 30th. It was on vulnerable user safety, pedestrians primarily, but also bicyclists in a Vision Zero context. And we have other webinars that we intend to offer on Vision Zero, particularly around things that some of the leaders and some of the best practices are amongst the folks that are focused on Vision Zero. We just today launched a mini-series, a mini podcast series. The first episode of that, it'll run for the next 4 months from May through August. The first episode features Debbie Hersman from the National Safety Council and our Executive Director, Jeff Pagnotti, talking about the Road to Zero Coalition report. It's about 25 minutes long. It's really good. I encourage you to just go on the website and find that and give that a listen when you have a chance. And then we're also involved in a partnership with Microsoft and some other partners on analyzing near-miss data to try and develop a predictive tool for improving safety at intersections. And you can sign up to be part of that effort on our website as well. If you could go to the next slide, Jamie. The other thing I wanted to talk about just for a second is, and Jane mentioned our Road to Zero Coalition grant, and I'll give you a little bit of background on that because it really was kind of a combination of things that happened, all kind of pointed in the same direction. The NTSB came out with a study last summer on the problem of speeding and its contribution to the more than 10,000 annual speeding-related fatalities. And that got our membership, and particularly our Vision Zero Steering Committee, pretty interested in the topic of, well, what can ITE be doing to help work on this issue? Because we recognize pretty quickly that we're not going to get to zero unless we figure out how to address the problem of speeding and managing those speeds. And this is a problem area where we kind of know what works. We need to have appropriate speeds. We need to set target speeds that are appropriate for the context, that protect all system users. We need to design our roadway facilities to achieve those target speeds, and we need the other E's, education and enforcement, to help us out on that. So it's not a question of not knowing what to do. In some ways, it's just a question of knowing how to do it, what's effective, and implementing what we know works, which is, one of the key tenets of the Road to Zero effort. So we put in a proposal, and right about the time that gelled within ITE, we had an opportunity to put in a proposal for a project, and we're fortunate enough to receive a Road to Zero Coalition grant to develop some in-person training in speed management. And what we are going to try and do through this is to develop some material, and we're going to present that material in a number of different settings. We're going to pick a large-scale national event where there's lots of transportation people already there, and deliver the material that we develop in the national peer exchange format. And in the hopes that we can have folks that are also interested in this issue take that, what they've learned, back to their community. But we're also going to deliver the same training in a couple of individual communities, one fairly large, one smaller, where we will gather the stakeholders that are critical for speed management in that community and have a day-long exchange with them of technical information, of policy information, of ideas, and implementation steps. And again, the idea is to do that in a couple of places and do it in a way that we can then take that that training and those thoughts and ideas and what we learn from those interactions out to other places. We're doing this project in partnership with the Vision Zero Network, who we've worked with on the Road to Zero Coalition. And again, we are Looking forward to getting started on the project. It starts July 1st and developing and delivering some of the training products over the next year. We also, just to mention a couple of other activities that, a lot of what we will be focused on is the activities surrounding the grant, but we're also intending to create an on-demand speed management resource hub where there will be technical material, webinars, case studies, outreach material, and so on. We're going to develop an online discussion space for speed management topics through our ITE community, which for most other issues is open only to our membership. But on this topic, we're going to figure out how to open up that community to folks who aren't ITE members, so that all can have the value of having their questions answered and the discussion that will take place. We intend to do an outreach piece on speed limit setting. Jane mentioned the 85th percentile method for setting speed limits, which has been around for a long time, and it's certainly still a factor that's important in setting speed limits, but as Jane said, there are other factors, other contextual factors that need to be taken into consideration as well. And there is more flexibility in how speed limits are set than most people realize. So we're going to try and do some education on that as well. And I'm sure that as we get further into the topic of developing resources for speed management for our members and other transportation professionals, we're going to come up with other ideas as well. So I wanted to give you just a little bit of context about what we're doing to support getting to zero as a goal. And I just wanted to say in closing that if we ITE, the ITE staff or our 15,000 members even tried to do this by ourselves, we wouldn't get there because it's too daunting a task. It's too hard, even for a large organization. But I will say that all of us working together, you heard that there are 700 members now of the Road to Zero Coalition, and there are others who aren't part of the coalition in the transportation community. If we can all figure out how to work together, and you can take the ideas and the plans that ITE has that I just talked about, and we can multiply those by those 700 organizations and by the rest of us that care about getting to zero and improving highway safety, I do think we can get there. And I do think that the Road to Zero tenets of doubling down on what works and creating and nurturing a safety culture and investing in new technology are the right ways to get there. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeff. And at this point, we will take any questions you might have for Jeff. You can put those again over in the chat pod on the left-hand side. We did have a question about the agenda for the ITE annual conference, so I did put a link into the chat pod for that, as well as the link for the podcast that Jeff mentioned as well about the Road to Zero Vision Report, that podcast done by National Safety Council, Road to Zero, and ITE. So that link is available now for you guys. I am going to move us over to a poll break while those questions are coming in. It does look like we have a few over there. So this poll for you all is, what are examples of actions I can take? Propose a Road to Zero priority statement, apply for a Road to Zero grant, use the ITE Safety Resources Toolbox, attend ITE webinars and podcasts on Road to Zero, all of the above, none of the above, I don't know or I don't remember. It looks like that was a pretty easy one. Everyone got that one right with all of the above, and that is true. All of those things are available. Road to Zero does have priority statements that you can propose on their website. They also have the Road to Zero grants, which you can find on their website. ITE does have that Safety Resources Toolbox that they mentioned, and the link was provided on the previous slide. The Safety Center did host ITE a month or two ago to do a webinar on that toolbox as well, so you can find that on our archived webinar page. There is a whole hour-and-a-half webinar on that toolbox and how to use it, so if you would like more information on that, you can look up our archived webinar. As well as the ITE webinars and podcasts that exist. Again, I did put that link in the chat pod for everyone. We would encourage you to go ahead and look at that. Jeff, the question that we had for you is, could you discuss the road safety professional certification that ITE just came out with?
Sure. Let me see if I can do that shortly. So as many of you probably know, ITE is affiliated with a group called the Transportation Professional Certification Board. It's a group that is not part of ITE, but is sort of linked to ITE. We do certifications, or the board does certifications currently for professional traffic operations engineers and for transportation planning professionals. And we were approached by the community, really, a year or two ago with a desire to develop a road safety professional certification program. The program is being developed so that it has two parts. There is a level 1 certification, which is designed for folks that have that have some role in highway safety, which is most transportation professionals, and it covers, it would cover the sort of the basic foundational knowledge of highway safety. That certification is ready to be implemented. There will be an exam that will be held this coming fall. Prior to that, there will be a refresher course that we will be offering for folks that are interested in taking that exam. And that periodically after that, the exams will be offered. We're also working on a level 2 certification, which is designed for professionals where roadway safety is their job on a day-to-day basis, and that will be split into two different certifications. One is primarily for folks that are working in the behavioral safety areas, and the other is for folks that are working in the infrastructure, design, engineering-oriented safety areas. Those certifications, work is begun on those, but they won't be ready to go to the exam stage until about a year after the phase 1 or the level 1 safety professional certification. So fall of 2019 for that one.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Jane, I'm going to have you go ahead and finish off the webinar, and we do have one more question and answer period for everyone, so if you do have final questions, go ahead and put those into the chat pod.
Great. Thanks, everybody, and thanks, Jeff, for that input. Just excellent presentation. IT's been a great partner to have on the road to zero. And one of the things I just really want to mention and close with is we have zeros that happen around us probably on a pretty regular basis. And I think while I mentioned talking about 100 people that we lose a day, what are those things that we can celebrate and take time to recognize when things do go right? And here's an example from Montana from March, at the end of March of this year, when they celebrated the fact that they had gone 30 days without a deadly car crash. Finding those opportunities to say, hey, something's going right. It's not just about the doom and gloom, but we are doing some things right is important, because we will have plenty of lives to mourn that we lose along the way, but recognizing where we're actually doing things right is important too. And so I just encourage all of you, as you're working in the area of roadway safety, to just be able to find those opportunities to give an attaboy is important. And Jamie, I just have one other thing to quickly mention here, but I think you've got a few things to mention as well.
Yes, absolutely. So does anyone have any final remaining questions? If so, go ahead and please put those into the chat pod on the left-hand side. We do have one more poll question for everybody that I'm going to go to, and this is the same one we asked at the very beginning of this presentation. So have you ever heard of the Road to Zero Coalition? And do you believe zero fatalities is achievable? I'm going to let everyone go ahead and update those answers. Okay, and it does look like most people have updated their answer that they now know what the Road to Zero Coalition is. And our answers have changed a little bit for the whether or not you believe it's achievable. So now we have 41% at yes, whereas we had 27% before. We still have that 46% at the maybe, but we did get some of those no's to change to yes. So very good job, both Jeff and Jane, in making them see that that is achievable. At this point, before I move back over to the presentation, I am going to mention one additional thing here, and then we will finish up the presentation real quick. And someone had a great quote over in the chat pod, "Zero fatalities starts with you," and that is absolutely true, so thank you for saying that. One of the ways that you can help get to zero fatalities is by attending the second National Summit on Rural Road Safety. It's going to be entitled Bridging the Gap. It is being co-hosted currently by the Safety Center and NACE. It will be held December 4th through the 7th, 2018 in Savannah, Georgia. It will include the second Local Road Safety Plan Pilot Workshop, which is an invitational-only workshop. It will also include 2 full days of training workshops, and we do hope that between those 2 full days that we're able to offer at least 4 workshops within them. And it will be 1 day of summit. The website where you can get more information as we continue to offer that or roll that information out is on the screen right now. Again, the Save the Date card is available in the handouts as well. We do hope to have a draft agenda and more information about hotel registration and registration for the event itself out within the next couple of weeks, so you can keep checking back on that website. Also on the Safety Center's website, you can find the information for the previous summit if you weren't able to attend. That one was held in September of 2016 in Denver, Colorado. Some resources I just want to leave you with. Again, the link to find the Road to Zero Vision document that the National Safety Council has put out is the top link. Also, the video that we did show at the beginning of the presentation, the link for that is available as well. The Safety Center also has an Introduction to Safety Culture video that you may want to share within your organizations. That link is provided. As well as that final link is the place where you can find all of the Safety Center's archived webinars. As I mentioned, there is an archived webinar on the ITE's new Vision Zero Toolbox. There are also a couple of other webinars on Road to Zero and Vision Zero topics, including safety organization culture as well. So you can check out our previous webinars. You are also eligible to get certificates of completion and the CEUs for all of those archived webinars as well, as long as you fill out the survey that is provided with that streaming link. So again, in this webinar, we hope you've learned to understand that zero is an achievable goal for our roadways and that we have reached it in other modes, to appreciate current roadway death and injury data, to learn about the Road to Zero Coalition and realize that more partners that are available with a commitment to shared goals, to how to participate in the Road to Zero Coalition, how to take action by energizing a large coalition around roadway safety proposals, and to recognize the need to celebrate zeros when and where we can. A few upcoming Announcements for you. The next webinar for the Safety Center will be on rural intersection safety and countermeasures by a guest speaker from FHWA. That will be held Thursday, June 14th. In July, we will have Hillary Eisbrins from FHWA talking about roundabouts. And in August, we will have another FHWA safety engineer talking about designing for rural bike safety. TribalSafety.org is also hosting a couple of upcoming webinars that may be applicable for our audience. The TTAP Safety Training Overview will be held on Tuesday, June 12th. The link to register for that is provided on the screen now, and again, it's available in that handout down in the left-hand corner, as well as them also hosting a Vision Zero webinar on Tuesday, June 26th, and that registration link is also available there. Jane, I think you'd like to talk about this one.
Yeah, just to let y'all know that June 6th, the National Safety Council will be releasing a report on pediatric vehicular heat stroke. This is, of course, when children are left in cars and their body temperature rises to the extent where they actually die as a result of that. And it really can happen anywhere. This isn't a cold state or warm state issue, but you can see here from this map of pretty much every state has been touched by a vehicular heat stroke. Part of this is just getting more attention on the topic, make sure people are aware of it, and ways to deal with it, measures, countermeasures that can be taken to prevent it. So just be on the lookout for that. Again, June 6th, we're putting that out. And then also just real quickly, June is National Safety Month. We've got the last week of the month is trying to highlight roadway safety, but please join in social media and other ways to celebrate National Safety Month. You can find resources too at the National Safety Council website at nsc.org/NSM. And thank you so much, everybody, for participating today. It was a real pleasure to talk with you about the Road to Zero, and I hope that you'll all join the coalition.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Jane and Jeff, we do really appreciate you taking the time to speak with our audience. And for all of you on the phone, if you do have any additional questions for Jane or Jeff, you can find their email addresses on the screen right now, as well as how to get in contact with us at the Safety Center. So thank you, everyone, for taking the time to listen. And again, one more time, Jane and Jeff, thank you very, very much for speaking today for us. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, you too.